Welcome to the Sun today for the 20th of January 2022. And the big news is that we had an M5.5 flare, the third largest flare of this cycle so far, and it was accompanied by a proton event. Here is the space weather dashboard that I posted on Twitter this morning. You can see that we have a magnetosphere that it seems to be calming down, at least for the moment. The sunspot number, according to the official record, is pretty flat. In the insert at the bottom, number 4, we have the M5.5 flare that occurred earlier this morning, and more on that later. Here is the sunspot classification. I'm just going to leave it here for reference, so if you need to understand what I'm talking about, it's when I talk about an alpha or beta region, you can come back to this and check it out. So let's start looking at the sunspot regions. I'll go through them in order of their number according to NOAA. The first region and the oldest region is 2927 and is right here on the southwest limb and is decayed quite a bit. There just seems to be 2 spots there, so this is an alpha region. The next region is active region 2929. That's on the northwest limb. This is the region that produced the M5.5 flare. Just to the north of that is region 2930. You can see there's 3 spot groups there, and it's very much the twin of 2929, but has been far less active. Then we have the remnants of active region 2932 near Sun Center in the northern hemisphere. I can see 3 spots here, but they're very, very faint, and that's fewer spots than we had yesterday. So I think this region is eventually decaying away. Then we have region 2932 down in the southwest. That will be with us for a few more days, but it has decayed an awful lot over the last couple of days. So I'm not sure that it will return. We have the new region that I saw yesterday in the northeast. There's a couple of spots on there, but they're very small, and I don't suspect that this region will be with us very much longer unless it starts to develop quite rapidly. Now we're getting a clearer view of the new region in the southeast. It's a single spot, so it's an alpha region, and it's a very, very large spot. It's probably the size of the Earth. But again, this is probably an old region. I suspect it might be region 2916 returning. And so we can't really expect very much out of an alpha region that's this old as far as flaring is concerned. The official sunspot number from the SIDC is flat, although I think that's going to drop fairly rapidly tomorrow. It's round about 60, which is much lower than the equivalent time during the last rotation, where it was well over 100. So the sun has quieted down a bit since then. Some people put a lot of faith in the number of spotless days. I don't particularly, but just for completeness, the number of days since we last had a spotless day was 70 days. It looks as though it's going to go on in this way for quite some time yet. Here is the GOES X-ray plot. All day yesterday we had no C flares at all. We had 3 small C flares this morning, and then we had the M5.5 from region 2929. As I say, this is the third largest flare of solar cycle 25. Well, let's start by looking at some movies. We're going to first take a look at the sunspot movie from the Solar Dynamics Observatory HMI instrument. Next, we'll take a look at the low temperature corona using the SDO AIA instrument, the 171 angstrom channel. And this is an equivalent temperature of about 600,000 degrees Kelvin. Lastly, we'll use the AIA instrument again, but this time the 94 angstrom channel, which has a characteristic temperature of about 6 million degrees Kelvin. And this will show us the flare. So flashes in these regions are the flares, and the 2 big flares, the 2 M flares, come towards the end of the movie in region 2929, which I'll remind you is in the northwest quadrant. That's the upper right. Next, we'll go to a different spacecraft, the SOHO LASCO instrument, which is a coronagraph, and we're going to use the C2 channel, which is the high resolution inner corona channel, and we'll be able to see the evolution of any coronal mass ejections during the time of observations. The C3 channel for SOHO LASCO is a much larger field of view, but it's at lower resolution. Here you can see the large scale structure of coronal mass ejections, comets crashing into the sun and things of that sort. Let's take a look at see what the solar wind is doing at the moment. The solar wind BZ component, which is important as for interaction with the Earth, is pretty much near zero, so there's likely to be little interaction at the moment. The speed has dropped significantly since yesterday. It was nearly 700 kilometers per second yesterday, and now it's down below 500. As I mentioned earlier, the M5.5 flare was accompanied by a proton flare, and you can see this from the GOES proton flux monitors. The 10 MeV channel exceeded the threshold for a warning from NOAA for a few hours. Now, so this is a relatively modest event. It is interesting in that it would be a hazard to astronauts in deep space, on the moon, or on Mars. As I said earlier, the volume of GEOSPACE seems to be calming down. The KP index is 1 to 0 for the last few hours, and that's very, very quiescent indeed, especially compared with what it's been like for the last 4 or 5 days. We have models that will predict the aurora, where they'll be and how strong they'll be. The models at the moment show a fairly weak aurora and doesn't seem to be forecasting any strong major geomagnetic event, at least in the near future. So what conclusions can we draw from all of this? The sunspot number is declining as large regions rotate over the west limb. Region 2929 produced an M5.5 flare, which was accompanied by a CME and a weak proton event from the M flare. So that's it for today. Stay safe, and until next time, goodbye.